Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen.
With me today is life coach and LOA teacher Joel Elston.
This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today.
And Sam can't join us today. Hopefully he'll be able to join us again next week. But we have a really interesting topic to talk about today. I mean, we talk often here about the power of the mind, and we've had many guests telling us about different techniques you can use. There's NLP, there's hypnosis, there's a variety of things that you can do to kind of retrain your brain, retrain your responses, retrain what you're focusing on, and so forth. But the story that Joel's about to tell us is one I have to admit I hadn't heard before. And I asked him about the details before we got started, and I looked it up, and wow, I can't believe that I have never heard of this guy, and I'd be willing to bet you haven't either. But you're about to, because Joel's going to tell us the story. So first thing I got to ask, hello, Joel. Welcome. Glad to see you again.
Good to see you, buddy.
But I have to ask you, how did you find out about the story? Do you remember when you first heard about it?
I did. 4 or 5 years ago, I went to the hypnotherapy school in California to become a certified hypnotherapist, and very fascinated by the whole, and like with most studies, you get into the history of things. And this gentleman that we're going to be talking about, Milton Erickson, is referred to as the father of hypnotherapy. Now, hypnosis has been around forever, for a long time. In fact, religion is sort of a form of hypnosis, where, you have somebody with a standing elevated, he's repeating the same thing over and over. Donald Trump uses a form of hypnosis where you just say the same thing over, regardless of truth or whatever. You just repeat it. And then people are like, oh yeah, well, clearly, you didn't pay the hooker or whatever, so, it's this
interesting message. Okay. Yeah.
So you have this thing about him, but this gentleman, through this chain of events, shows you how bright he is. And he not only really perfected or developed hypnotherapy for use in psychotherapy, but he also is one of the first ones to inadvertently, he didn't call it positive psychology. That was Martin Seligman sort of developed that years later.
Right.
But this is the underpinnings of positive psychology, and I'll sort of show you how we get there. But it's a fascinating story, and like you're saying, for me to have discovered it, it's basic law of attraction, it's basic neuroplasticity, it's all the stuff that I'm into, neuroscience of the brain, how it works, and it's just a fascinating look at how powerful the brain is, and how your perspective and how all that has an impact on it. But just the chain of events leading to this is just, again, I have no adjective to describe how profound this is to me, at least, especially in my line of work.
And this is a number of years ago. This is it's almost 70, 80 years ago, something like that.
Yes. And so he didn't have the advantage of the knowledge we have now. So that's what makes it even better to understand, or even more, you can appreciate it even more, because he didn't have this knowledge that we have today, which gives us all this. A lot of the stuff he was saying years ago has just been recently, in the last few years, with the brain imaging and the stuff we understand now about the brain, is sort of reinforced. So he was considered a kook by some in the beginning, but he really became well respected and changed the course of sort of therapy in general, because previous to that, it was pretty much Freud and your mom.
Right.
Yeah.
And the Freud story was distorted anyway, so it wasn't even an accurate story.
Yeah. I mean, Freud was busy with his mom in his brain. That everything filtered through that, and nothing wrong. I mean, Freud was a really good guy, but he just sort of, no matter what, it's about your mom. And so that's what it boils down to, so he went away from that, and he also was the founder of I believe it was the American Psychological Association. So he just became this bigger, and all came from this chain of events starting early in his childhood.
So tell us the story. I mean, and when I titled this episode, I titled it, "He Cured Himself of Polio with the Power of His Mind." So polio obviously plays a big role in this.
Sure.
Curing polio with the mind, that's going to raise a few eyebrows at the least, but we got to find the story. So what's the story?
Right. Well, and just to be clear, polio is a disease that attacks the body. Then it goes away, but the deformity from the polio is what he actually cured. Does that
Okay.
make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah. So
that definitely fits better.
yeah, polio is the disease that causes the damage. He didn't cure that, but
Right.
nobody before that had ever overcome the devastating effects of polio, and the paralyzed people were always paralyzed at that point.
Okay.
So,
All right.
so that gets relevant later, but in his
But
early
that's still
childhood,
significant. Even that's a big breakthrough.
yeah, which to me is just fascinating because so early in his childhood he was very late in speaking, conflicting times, but he was almost 2 years old before he started speaking is what sort of the general rule of thumb were, and he was tone deaf, dyslexic, and colorblind. So he had a lot going on in his childhood that he had deficits, he learning his colors and so you look at that combination, you're tone deaf, colorblind, and you're dyslexic. So by most standards, you're not going to be considered one of the brightest kids in the bunch. So,
oh, right. Yeah.
yeah.
And in fact, interesting side story about tone deafness. I won't go into the story in detail, although I told it many years ago, actually. But I encountered, in my travels as a young man, I was a musician, and I encountered a kid who lived in the neighborhood where I lived at that time, who was presented to me as a tone deaf guitar student. And sure enough, he behaved tone deaf. And it took me a while to figure out how to get around it. When I finally figured out how to get around it, I realized that he was just missing some basic understanding of what the words are that we associate with tone. And once I explained them, I realized he really wasn't tone deaf. He didn't know what we were talking about. So I'm kind of curious to know, did this guy really know what tone was, but he had no way of explaining it and had no idea what we were talking about?
That is one of the possibilities, and I have no way to find that out. That's a great point.
Okay.
But I've done some, as you can imagine, I've done some deep dive on research. I've read about 15 different versions of his story, and I've sort of cultivated the center. There's some that, but so again, struggling through school, never the top of his class, but his mom was very helpful in helping him learn and really promoted it normalcy. And again, we're going way back in time. They didn't have the systems in place for people who are lagging or have disabilities. So, mom really made up a lot of that. So, things were going okay. He was doing pretty good. He was sort of a frail kid. And then around 16 or 17 years of age, he contracted polio and it devastated him. It almost killed him. It paralyzed him, again, I don't have all the details. The issue is the word paralyzed, but he was so paralyzed he could no longer talk. He was unable to speak, and he just would sit on the couch, and his mom would bring him food. Well, it just really a sad future of an existence. But his brain was good. His brain was fine. But it was hard for him to communicate. So, but his mom would talk to him as things are, hey, keep him up to date. There's not a lot of mention of his dad in this, so I don't know. I'm sure the dad was supportive if he was around, but so when he was around 17, around 16, his mom had a late in life child. So he's 16, 17. All of a sudden, a baby comes along, his little sister. Right. So his little sister's there, and she's plopped down on the floor in front of him over the first few months of her life, and he's just watching her in her development. She can't even keep her head up. At first, and all of a sudden she's keeping her head up, then she can sit up, and they started crawling. So he had the idea that, why don't I do what she's doing? Just maybe through instinctive nature, let me just literally get on the floor and do he was able to express that to his mom, and he would get on the floor with her and just literally spend the day following the baby, crawling. And using his hand and started making progress. He started, doing that. So when the baby started to stand up, he started to stand, and they literally learned to walk together. As the baby learned to talk, he just mimicked what the baby was doing, the same thing. So his brain reverted back to that stage of neuroplasticity that just sort of it's almost like he created a whole new set of operating instructions for his brain. So his brain started working around the paralyzed muscles and started developing new connections, is my guess. Again, we don't have any imaging to determine that, but that would be the likely route.
Yeah.
And so as he got stronger, he became a very strong speaker because he was now practicing. So he developed a really deep voice. He started, now when he started walking, now he's not taking for granted. So he started exercising and then started running. So he really just used it to his advantage.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
he was very interested in this whole process. So he went to medical school and he was studying that. And he started putting together this hypothesis that of the best thing he could come up with. I sort of hypnotized myself, and he studied hypnosis, but he started applying to the therapy side. And so he started using it on his patients, getting them relaxed, getting them in the right mindset, getting them in a certain the brainwave state where the subconscious can be suggested. And he really perfected that, started having incredible success. And over the years, he helped many people quit smoking, quit a lot of obsessive habits, and really just help deal with trauma by getting to that subconscious root of all that stuff. And it went from sort of being this weird dude that did hypnosis to literally called in his lifetime the father of hypnosis, and trained thousands of people underneath him. And there's some really famous psychiatrists that learned right under directly that eventually used hypnotherapy in their practice. So it went really well, but he took it further toward the latter part of his career. He also realized that chain of events, the tone deafness, the dyslexia, the processing of color blindness. He said, I had to learn to do these things in a different way. So he started realizing, wait a minute, my brain is my brain because I went through those things. Those weren't deficits now. They were events that moved me forward. So he started imagining that. He started looking at his polio as like, I wouldn't have come up with hypnotherapy if I didn't have polio and I didn't have that. So he started using the concept of the growth mindset book by Carol Dweck from Stanford that I'm really fond of, but talking about, he could have had the victim mindset of like, all these things crushed me, but he used a growth mindset, and he really espoused the concept that he overcame those things, and without those things, he wouldn't have had the career and become the incredibly respected professional, one of the great doctors of our time, without those chain of events. So he was able to, further than hypnotherapy, also begin the underpinnings of positive psychology.
Wow. That's a very impressive story. I mean, probably the first impressive part is that he takes this concept of hypnosis and apparently is the first human to turn that into a therapeutic tool. That all by itself is, that's an amazing, it's not, amazing is probably the wrong word. It is a highly impressive thing to do.
Yes.
Because it's always had this kind of quasi negative, that's like, but stage magician's trick kind of a thing.
Yes.
And he made it something serious.
Yes. And before him, that's all hypnosis was. You'd go to the fair, you can cluck like a chicken, you do these things, and it just was a side show at the circus. But he really started to make progress, and he was one of the first ones to really start naming. I don't remember what, and I'm dropping the term he used. He did not use subconscious brain, but he is the one that started realizing there's two functioning parts of the brain, and the active everyday thing, but I need to get to that subconscious, the root, the programming part. And so he was, I think he actually used the word unconscious brain, which, morphed into today's word of subconscious brain. So it was just fascinating for him to see that. But the chain of events, this is sort of that law of action concept that I'm talking about, that sitting on the couch, watching his little sister start to move, he's like, I'm not going to sit here and watch my sister learn to walk while I'm just hanging out on the couch all day. I'm going to do this. So what better way to learn how to walk but than an expert that's programmed, that's literally programmed to walk? That, the first thing that the brain does is start saying, okay, when you come out of the womb, it's like, okay, I got to start breathing on my own, got to start digesting on my own, blood's pumping on my own. Now next, I'm going to start walking. It's like everything's pre-programmed that first year. So a side of him said, wow, everything I need to learn to do is pre-programmed in my sister. So let's do what she's doing.
Interesting that he expresses it that way, if that is indeed how he expressed it, because of course another way to express the same thing is he could have been thinking about it as, I'm going to remember what I used to know. but
Yes.
apparently it's more along the lines of I'm going to relearn it, which is interesting.
Right. Well, and it's a big distinction because the part that he knew was destroyed in the process of polio killing it.
Hmm.
So if you get stuck on relearning what you knew, that probably doesn't work the same way. I got to start from square one. I got to reprogram the new areas. The old areas are dead.
Yeah.
So if I'm trying to spend all day relearning what I knew, then I'm probably not going to be successful. Now, I'm that's my theory. But
well, yeah, I get that. But I guess my point is, it's impressive that he went that route because
sure.
I don't know that they really had a whole lot of information at that point about what polio does. So
right.
I'm not 100% sure that he knew that, the neural passages were damaged. All he knew was that he was involved.
Yeah. Yeah. This is very instinctive or the universe is, providing or whatever is going on here, but there's certainly a component at play here that I can't explain because the leaps that he jumped to, it literally has been the last 7 years that we can verify what he somehow figured out.
I think in today's language, we would describe that as he was in touch with his inner being. He was highly intuitive.
Yes. And being able to, be in contact with that and have some communication with that. And, that's impressive, but how it's relevant to today. So to me, one of the things that it motivates me to do is if this guy can do this, then if I need to change something, I can, I don't have anything to overcome like that. So using tools to, if we have habits or we need to break, to me, my thinking is sometimes the stuff that gets me in trouble over the years. So learning to, we were talking pre-show about some thinking, and really a crazy topic to start the show with. But I have to, those are areas that I still have to deal with. So I have to, I can use techniques to, stop overthinking or anxiety or those things that the last remnants of what was, left over my addiction part of my life and the early part of my life. I can use these tools to quickly mitigate those, and I no longer deal with any of that stuff.
I want to ask you because you took the course in hypnosis, hypnotherapy. I'm not sure exactly what the name of the course.
I'm a certified hypnotherapist. Yes, never used it, but I am.
Okay. All right. You never use it though. Well, it sounds like you've actually thought about, well, maybe I should start working on myself. But that kind of leads into the topic in question I wanted to kind of go to next. And that is we hear about hypnotherapy. We hear about NLP, for instance, neuro-linguistic programming. We hear about a lot of ways of kind of trying to leverage that neuroplasticity that you were referencing earlier. And I think, most of us think in terms of, well, I need to go to somebody who's an expert at it. Very often we have coaches, hypnotherapists and so forth coming out of the program because they want to share that they're able to do this and here's some of the stuff they've learned, and it's really cool information. But when we face the idea, or at least consider the idea of trying to do it ourselves, that starts to get kind of daunting, which first of all makes his accomplishments even more impressive. But for somebody who wants to kind of leverage all that, where do you begin? How do you get that going?
Well, one of the lines in my school and the concept of all hypnotherapy is self-hypnosis. All hypnosis is self-hypnosis. Now, you might have somebody managing that for you, but it's all done internally. So you have, like, if we're sitting down there, here's sort of a quick thing. If I'm going to put you into a trance, we start talking and I have, there's an arm method, I'll have you, mentally, your arm gets very heavy and it goes down and it goes down and it goes down. And you count that down. There's a staircase concept where you can walk down. There's a million different ways to get there. But when you get there, you get into right on the edge of sleep. It's not sleep, but you're right on the edge of sleep. So you're more suggestive. Right before you fall asleep at night, how your brain can do crazy things and think, it's wide open. It's like, if you have that moment, you're like, so you're more open to suggestion, that mindset. So you put somebody in that place. So if you want to do it yourself, there's some really good YouTube videos about self-hypnosis. And a lot of it is, you're getting yourself to a calm, the different brain states, where you're in that that relaxed state where you can start doing auto suggestions, what you're trying to do. It's just reminding yourself that trying to talk to your subconscious brain, like when you're, NLP, I'm also certified NLP, that I love NLP, and there's so many different ways you do it. But NLP's main concept is reframing. It's looking at things differently. It's a form of hypnosis in a sense, because you're trying to reprogram. Like if I need to quit thinking about this event over and over. It's taking up my time, but the mere thinking about it creates more thinking about it.
Right.
So,
right.
The concept of, I need to refocus over here. I need to put my focus over on another. And you're able to stop thinking when you can come up with another. So you use these techniques to calm the brain, then make new suggestions into that, replace it with healthy suggestions or something that isn't as destructive. And you do that repetitively, and you can eventually change the subconscious programming causing that.
Now, the challenging part from my perspective, and I don't know, this may or may not be what other people think as well, but I always thought it was the big elephant in the room is if you're in a suggestible state, you're not exactly in the best state for giving yourself commands because you're suggestible. You're the recipient rather than the giver. So how do you kind of bridge that?
Well, you have your intentions, and you're planning on what you're saying when you're there, when you're in that state. People that are, I don't really recommend self-hypnosis for people who are in dire straits.
Okay.
Because of that reason, because you can talk yourself into some really deeper situations negatively. So self-hypnosis to me, hypnosis is fine when you have somebody who can control, you can control where we're going.
Okay.
When you have a certified hypnotherapist who you can go to the deep things, but you don't want to go there too much by yourself. I want to quit smoking is a pretty easy self-hypnosis tool. You know what I mean? Okay. And you could do that. I have to deal with childhood trauma is not a good one. You know what I mean? It's a vicious, brutal childhood trauma is not something I want to do lightly by myself in my brain, try to, handle that. You could use a hypnotherapist who could walk you through that, which would be fine. So I agree with you. You don't want to be in too suggestible of a state when you're especially in a depressive or an anxious mindset, because you actually are programming anxiety and more depression.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, how about, since you were talking about preparing in advance before you get yourself into that state, so you know what you're going to do once you get there. How about the use of affirmations? Does that make sense to you?
Affirmations is actually a form of self-hypnosis. It's,
okay.
Where you'll state what you want to say, what you want to be, and you want to program into your subconscious brain. The more suggestible you are, the more the affirmations have power. When you say it, again, we talked about religion or politicians. That is a technique that is, we see how effective it is. You say the same thing over and over again. You go to a Catholic church. Right. I'm sorry. You go to a church. I'm not going to do the Catholic stuff tonight. I promise.
Well, there's all kinds of religions. It's not just one. So I think you're
exactly. I wasn't. I won't do my normal Catholic rant. I'm just going to do religion. And they, the service is very predictive. So, you automatically, when it's time to stand up and say whatever, they're pre-programmed. They know what to say when to say it. So religion does it over and over and over. And you have these prayers that you say over and over and over, and they're memorized. Yeah. And so that is an affirmation. That's a way of pre-programming the brain or programming the brain. Mm-hmm. And it's very effective. So the affirmations work really well too, where you're in, I'm confident, I'm competent, I'm whatever you're dealing with. If you say it enough times and you really say it and you really mean it, the brain accepts that as fact.
And it's interesting to experience how that happens. The kind of the reason I'm bringing all this up is that for the last year or so, I have been experimenting with taking advantage of our technology, because we have this wonderful technology. We can record stuff and so forth. So I'll make up I guess you could call it a list of affirmations. I think of it more like here's a series of messages I want to kind of instill in myself as a belief system. And then I will read my list very slowly into a recording, and then I'll mix it with some very light, gentle music that I like and put the two together. And then I'll play that back for myself each time I'm getting ready to go to sleep at night, on the theory that if I'm getting ready to go to sleep, well, somewhere in there I'm falling into the hypnotic state, so it's probably the right time to hear it. And then I just play the thing each night. And as I mentioned a moment ago, it seems to be a kind of a transitional process that you notice over time. Like I noticed by doing that, whatever the topic is that I'm focused on with that affirmation list, if you will, I find myself becoming more and more confident about that topic. Doesn't matter what the topic is. It's like
absolutely.
It's not like I could say a whole bunch of stuff changed in my life, but my feeling about stuff changed.
Your perspective of it changed.
My perspective changed. Yeah.
Yeah.
And in the long run, as my perspective changed, then I start to see other stuff happening as well. But
right. And that's where we get the bridge into the law of attraction on some level too. Now that you're saying that, believing it, now the law of attraction is in play, attracting those new things you believe. And the work I do, I often speak of the work I do with kids that have been in foster care, and it's one of my passions, and that's basic. That is where I use a form of hypnotherapy. I don't put them in a trance. That could be dangerous for them. But what I do is I will do affirmations, and I'll point out, look what you survived. You're brilliant. Who can do that? Look where you're at. And I'll say that so much. You're look how you can't be, you can't be stupid. Like you keep telling me you're stupid. Look at what you've done. And I say it so much, they start to believe it. Yeah. Then they start to live it. Mm-hmm. We talked about Steve. Is it Marcus we use?
Marcus, yes.
Yes. With Marcus, he got really quick programmed, but I convinced him real quick that everything he believed about himself was wrong. And his grades changed instantly. His demeanor changed instantly because he now realized that stuff was false. So that, the kids can get it better when they really believe it, but to see a little kid eyes light up because the first time in their life, like this one kid literally told me, he's a little kid, like 10. And he goes, he had like a tear coming out. He goes, "You mean I'm not a piece of shit?" I go, bro, are you kidding? Look, who survived this? You're 10 years old. Look what you've been through. Boom, boom, boom. Look what you're doing. And he started like, crying and just excited. And it launched him to believe an entirely different thing. And so affirmations is a form of hypnotherapy. And you once you can reprogram those thoughts, like, the idea I talk about, being able, everything we know is stored subconsciously, and the assumption that a percentage of what we know is mislabeled or stored improperly or not true at all. But we have some of that stored. So it affects us when you have false beliefs about yourself, what you can't do, the idea that, wow, this is not true. I'm labeling that as not true because I had no real evidence, but that was programmed. I use the roller coaster story as a kid. I tell that story all the time, where scared to death of roller coaster because of my mom's fear of roller coasters. Until one day I rode a roller coaster, love roller coasters. Now me and my kid will hop on a plane and fly anywhere in the world around a roller coaster. I just, I love them, but I had to reprogram my perspective of those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The reprogramming aspect is also very interesting. And also a little intimidating, because I think most of us, not so much now perhaps, there's been a lot of attention given to neuroplasticity in various conversations, in the media and so on and so forth, social media, over the last, I'll say, 5 to 10 years. But as recently as, say, the turn of the millennium, we go back that far, I think it's fair to say that most people thought that the brain is what we might call neurofixed. It doesn't actually change. Doesn't actually shift, and that probably comes from the feeling that, well, it's so hard for me to change my old patterns. I've got these tapes playing and I can't change those tapes, and it just seems impossible.
Right.
So the whole neuroplastic concept is intriguing, especially, if you've been around for a while and you kind of have the other idea for quite some time, but it takes a while to get past it. Once you do get past it, that's really what the story about Marcus or one of these other kids that you work with, that's what their story illustrates. Once you do get past it, you can start making some really amazing progress, but you got to get past it first.
Well, and as we always remind everybody, you're most, up until age 12 or 13, you're the most, the brain is totally neuroplastic. Just, it's there. age 13, neural pruning starts. You start getting rid of stuff you don't need. But up until that point, it's just gathering everything. It's trying everything. That's why kids love everything when they're 8. And by the time they're 15, they're down to like, no, I don't like this. I only like this. They get rid of the stuff. So anything after that, neuroplasticity happens at a much slower rate. There's ways to increase it. There's people who can maximize neuroplasticity, but it works into people. And as long as you're functioning, your brain, there's neuroplasticity in the brain. It's just a harder bar to get, and maybe an entirely different show. So, because this is my new area of deep dives, but there's the use of psilocybin, the active ingredient in magic mushroom, drastically increases neuroplasticity back to childhood events. So there's huge studies taking place at Johns Hopkins and other major universities right now espousing the potential use. I'm not advocating for this because there's still a lot of research to be done, but this is a drastic, if this goes through like it's looking, this can change the way we deal with mental health forever. Instead of treating mental illness the way we treat it, we will be able to cure mental illness with 1 or 2 rounds of this treatment. And it's very exciting. And it's based on increasing neuroplasticity back to childhood abilities.
Yeah, we've actually talked about this topic here on the show a number of times. I remember one time when Debbie G, who was my co-host with Neo on the Friday show, there was at least a couple episodes where she talked about psilocybin and tremendous, not just personal experiences, but things that she had seen with people that she knew who had ridiculously crazy improvements of, various kinds of conditions and so forth through that. There's also a documentary that I believe it's on Netflix. Have you seen it called
Change Your Mind?
No, Fantastic.
Change Your Mind.
That was the one I had in mind.
Oh, another good one. Change Your Mind's another one. And there's several, but both are great.
Yeah. The Fantastic Fungi. Well, first of all, I love the Fantastic Fungi movie just because the computer generated graphics are intense. They're so well done. But also it has stories like that about people who were in all kinds of really rough medical situations and so forth. And the psilocybin actually helped to, shift things in their minds in ways that they would never have expected. And in fact, it gives a pretty good history about how they kind of propose a theory that it made a huge difference in terms of the growth of Homo sapien, as opposed to the earlier.
Oh yeah, that's an incredible chain of thinking, which there's a lot of validity, maybe some validity to it. It may have been the conduit that evolved the human brain to what the human brain became from Neanderthal man. It's just, it's fascinating. And I'd be glad to have a show about this in depth one day. You can imagine my deep dives concepts, but,
you go deep. We know that. Remember, those of us who've been around for a while listening to the show know how deep you go.
Yeah. 5 years ago, I had a patient arrive at my office. Her parents had spent over $1 million trying to get help for her heroin addiction. She was injecting enough heroin. I'm a 230 pound man. If I took half the dose she took, I would be dead in about 8 seconds.
That's amazing.
She was
alive.
Yeah. She had developed such a tolerance. She was on a $600 a day habit.
Wow.
And she really wasn't even getting high. She was just maintaining at that. So they had spent all this money and she relapsed, and her story it's brutal addiction. It's really too much to even share, but the stuff that people will do for their drugs. Right. Here she was, a brilliant, beautiful young lady, accepted to University of Virginia and was in the middle of this spiral. Right. So when her mom came, she said, the doctor sent me to you. I don't know what to do. She said, see what you could come up with. I said, my service there's nothing I can do at this point. I said, however, I do have a solution. I can't legally recommend this, but I can tell you about a place in Peru that does an ayahuasca ceremony, which is a very, very strong psychedelic. That's, that the concept is it's like an 8-hour DMT trip. Mm-hmm. And so here this beautiful young lady and her beautiful mom went to the jungles of Peru for an ayahuasca ceremony. And they were there for 3 days. And she came back, she reported to me, and this is what sold me on this concept. The treatment makes you not very nauseous. Everybody that takes it throws up, but then you go into an 8 hour just seeing entities and spiritual dive and just incredible. It's hard to describe, but she described the whole thing. She felt like, her insides were being torn apart. Her brain was being torn apart. She was scared to death. She was happy. She was sad. She relived everything. The next morning she woke up and her mom had brought some Suboxone just to handle if you try to keep her out of withdrawals the next day. And so she wakes up and she said, well, do you need your Suboxone? She goes, I don't think so. And her mom said, well, do you want to go smoke a cigarette before we go have breakfast? She goes, I don't want to do that either. And they went and had breakfast. She didn't smoke a cigarette or need her Suboxone. They came back to the United States. She had nothing that day. The next morning she wakes up and says, I have no cravings. I don't want to smoke a cigarette. I'm ready to get back to school.
Wow.
And that was, I don't know, several years, I'm lost on time.
Yeah.
She put it down. She never touched it again. She never started smoking again. She is graduate of school. She's a nurse. She is thriving, married with kids.
Wow.
All of this took place. And she, in her words, the ayahuasca cured my addiction, my anxiety, and my depression in a 12-hour period. Now, that's the word addiction and cure have never been used together. There's remission, there's recovery, but cure. She doesn't go to meetings. She takes no maintenance drugs, and she literally went off the highest dose of heroin I'd ever seen and walked away.
Yeah. That's astonishing.
Yeah. So that, and I've had other cases, but that was the most drastic. And so with addiction, with trauma, and the ability, if you think about mental illness, or you think about a lot of these anxiety driven things or traumatic type things, neuroplasticity, if you could get full blown neuroplasticity to reprogram all that, that's how you cure it. That's how you fix it. And again, when I'm saying all this, Walt, I need to be really clear. This is still in the infancy study. There are people with certain mental illnesses that do not need to take psychedelics. Young people do not, under any circumstances with a developing brain, need to be doing mushrooms. It's not cool. But in a therapeutic setting, and as time goes on, I believe this is the future of mental health. I really do.
Wow. That kind of stops you in your tracks when you hear that story.
Yeah. So again, neuroplasticity is the basis of why magic mushrooms or the psilocybin. I don't even like magic mushrooms because it sounds too, partyish, but the psilocybin ingredient, which opens up the path. And now that we're able to scan the brain while somebody's in a full blown, for lack of a better term, trip or experience, the brain it looks a 40-year-old man's brain looks like an 8-year-old brain as far as the pathways lit up, just learning like an 8-year-old.
Yeah. That's one of the more fascinating things about the technology that we have, that we can scan for things like that. We can image it. And of course, the lighting up part, when you're looking at a computer screen, that's a computer generated representation of what the data is showing. It's not like the brain is this great big light.
Right. Yeah. The computer's interpreting and lighting it up. And to be fair, I always try to play devil's advocate. A lot of that is open to interpretation too, of what's taking place, but there is certainly a change in what's going on in the brain, the communication, the blood flow. We can verify the two hemispheres of the brain drastically increase communication during these experiences. So again, I'm not selling that, but that is, I currently have some lobbyists working in Virginia trying to get this legalized for therapeutic use, not for party use. For that. So that is, but that, I believe that's where that's at. But again, because it fits right into, imagine what, Milton Erickson did, able to increase this neuroplastic brain and use those techniques. Well, people that are having their stroke patients right now that, there's implications that could be helpful for them if we could ever figure out how to do that, help that.
This is leading me in a couple different directions. I'm kind of torn which way to go. So I'm just going to kind of
Flip a coin.
there. Yeah. And say, and if I flip a coin, what I mean is I'm going to go inside and say which one feels better. So I'm going with one that feels better.
Okay.
But it's a topic I brought up before, especially in the last year and a half or so. We've had a lot of, doctors on the show in the last year, people who are taking steps, sometimes small steps, sometimes large steps outside of the mainstream and getting a lot of flack for it, but they're also getting interesting results for the things that they're doing.
Sure.
One of the things I'd like to ask them about, because everybody talks about the double-blind placebo-controlled study, otherwise known as the gold standard of scientific testing.
Sure.
And the part that always got me, and it's only in the last year or two that I've really found a way to express it clearly, but it has bothered me since I first heard about it in high school biology, biology, chemistry, physics, any of those. It bothered me that we heard the story, and for those who don't know the story or don't remember it, it dates back to World War II. They were treating soldiers who were being blown up and so forth, and the one MASH hospital ran out of morphine. They couldn't put the soldiers out of their pain while they're trying to treat them, and so somebody came up with the idea, well, let's just give them some sugar water and tell them that it's morphine and see what happens. And they started behaving like they were pain free, and it kind of amazed everybody. So that became known as the placebo effect. And then a few years later, as the development of the double-blind studies coming along, they're saying, well, we got to screen out placebo because that actually can ruin the results. And that's the part that always got me. The reason it got me is, it's twofold. First part is placebo, because of that original story, has always been limited to pain relief in terms of the way people talk about it, particularly in scientific circles. And yet, when they're screening for placebo, they're not just screening for it for pain relief, they're screening for it for test results of some sort of a substance in the body, which basically means they don't want this so-called placebo and its ability, which they're pretty much admitting exists, to influence positive outcomes to get in the way of the test. Well, I can understand trying to separate that out. The part that I don't understand is, why aren't we leveraging placebo? It doesn't make any sense to me. And then,
which drives me crazy, yes.
And the flip side of that is there's also a concept that goes along with placebo called nocebo, which is basically the diametric opposite of placebo. Placebo is where you are given the suggestion by a medical authority and you buy into it, kind of along the same lines of what we were talking about before, the propaganda effect. You're told the same thing over and over again, you start to believe it. It's kind of along that same line. The doctor tells you that this is going to help you in some way, and you take it, and it may be sugar water, but it still helps you. Well, the nocebo effect is the reverse. That's where the doctor gives you a dire diagnosis or something, and you start to believe that, and you start to live that out. In fact, you told a story last week about a guy who experienced exactly that phenomenon. So I'm tying that back now to what we just talked about regarding neuroplasticity. And I'm saying to myself, these are really powerful factors that the scientific community really is not giving enough attention to, in my opinion. But I'm wondering, in your opinion, especially in the light of what we talked about with psilocybin and what we've been talking about with Milton Erickson and the strides that he made to basically get the whole thing started, to what extent do you think that this new path that's kind of exploding here, path, interesting choice of words, of understanding neuroplasticity, of trying to apply it, of trying to use hypnosis and hypnotherapy to leverage it and so forth, to what extent do you think that's going to also tie in to, hopefully, maybe I'm being hopeful here, hopefully accepting and leveraging the power of placebo and nocebo? Because to my way of thinking, they're pretty much the same thing.
Well, and that's the beauty of it, that you read my mind. That's where we pull all this together, because everything we talked about, I believe in this so much. The body's, Milton Erickson proved. No, this is back in the day. This is no modern technology then. He cured the devastating effects of polio. He cured that. Nobody had done that before. And not only did he cure himself, he made himself stronger. He believed it. It changed his life. He went on to become a medical doctor. It changed everything. It made us look at everything different. So his belief alone, his body responded. The body will do what the mind or the brain is telling it to do. It wants to believe it'll do it, and it does. We have hundreds of thousands of millions of examples of that. So
Oh, we got a freeze from Joel. Hopefully he's going to be able to reconnect in a second here. We were doing so well too. We got 44 minutes in before he froze. Last week, I think we froze about once every 10 seconds.
Yeah, it happens. Yeah, I'm always back. I don't know why. My Wi-Fi says it's fine, but anyway. So where I was at, the concept that we have a lot of examples of doing this. So the exciting piece to me is, what if we combine everything you're saying, like the placebo effect? When you tell somebody the surgery is going to take place, I had my gallbladder out many years ago, and the man in the bed next to me, not bed, he's in the room next to me, and we're talking. He's about my age, and my family's always had gallbladder stuff, so mine came out. So the 11 o'clock Friday morning, I had my gallbladder out, and you know me, I'm fine, I'm ready to roll. And the doctor's like, Joel, you can't leave today. You got to spend the night. And I said, what do I have to do to leave today? And he goes, if you can walk around the entire floor of the hospital, I'll let you home. I put on my shoes. I walked around the entire floor of the hospital. And he said, oh my God, just leave. And he said, if you start bleeding out, call an ambulance. And I did not take painkillers. I'm not saying this to be Mr. Heeman. I was convinced this was a simple surgery. I'm going to go do this. And I'm not saying it didn't hurt. Of course it hurt. My stomach got cut open, but it wasn't debilitating pain. I did take some Tylenol PM just to take the edge off, but I didn't take any opiates or anything along those lines.
Right.
Well, 3 days later, I left my charger there. So 3 days later on Monday, I went back. I wasn't supposed to be driving, by the way, but I never quit driving at the time. So
stop it. Anything like that to stop you.
Yeah. So I went to pick up my charger, and the guy that had the surgery that was in the room beside me was still there.
Mm.
And he goes, oh my God. He said, what are you doing? He said, this was the worst thing I've ever been through. And oh my, this is so painful. And I go, oh, I'm okay. I'm sorry. I hope you feel better. I mean, but it was his belief system. I used wow, this is going to be easy. And it really was. My body responded as I expected to respond. Mm. Those ideas, our brain does it. So when you take that further, then imagine being able to, people that one of the things they're doing with psilocybin is people that are terminally ill or really old people that are facing death. And they allow them to have these experiences, and they report, 90% of them report the fear of death goes away. Whatever happens, they live a much fuller life. It doesn't cure those things. It doesn't cure death. I'm not claiming that, but they have a much fuller life for whatever time they have. Instead of dreading every day, there's something that happens to them that they just accept this is going to go, and they probably do live longer, but whatever time it is, they're certainly living a lot better. Again, the brain will respond as you're believing. So you combine the neuroplasticity with the placebo effect or the nocebo effect suggestion. You're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. In fact, I'm expecting this full recovery. The doctors, I always got furious at the doctors that would tell people, well, there's a 90% chance you won't survive.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, so you picked a random ass number and you're telling, so now the guy's responding as that's true. But, and I'm not saying you have to, it's just like, look, I want examples of the 10% that did live. Let's talk about those guys. We talked about that last week about COVID.
Right.
800 people died today from COVID. Well, 300,000 people have recovered from it. Let's also talk about that. But we need to put our emphasis on that stuff, and the body and the brain respond so much better. And this is what is exciting, that all of these things, whether it's neuroplasticity or hypnotherapy, all of this believe it or not, it's coming from a bunch of different directions, but we end up at the same place.
Yeah.
And the combination, and one thing I am willing to do, if you ever want to do this, under a therapist care in a state that it was legal, I've never discussed this publicly. I have had a psilocybin experience.
You have? Oh,
and,
okay.
Yeah. And one day we should talk about that. It was probably the most profound thing that ever happened.
No, I definitely let's make that next show. Actually, that sounds really good.
Let's do it. Yeah. And again, I did it with a therapist present.
Right.
Somebody trained in that, and it's a state that it was illegal to do it in. So I did nothing wrong illegally, but, and cause I just had to see what it was about. And, with my trauma of losing my son TJ and some of the stuff I've been through, I didn't know how to respond to it, but it was magical. And it was something that under the right circumstance, again, when it's legal or I'm in a state that's legal, I will certainly do it again. And I'm a man that I don't drink beer. I don't smoke pot. I'm just, so to me, I just think it's one of the most therapeutic things a person can do if it's right for you and it's that right scenario and you're not suffering for any other mental illness and the professionals there, something to consider when it's legal. But I having done that is when that sort of gave me that final answer of, wow, my perspective for 3 weeks after that, it's hard to measure. I got a really good perspective every day. I'm always positive, but things were even it's a little brighter, what I mean? It's like, it's like, if anything, I'm like, okay, you need to slow this down, bro. You don't have a lot more bandwidth.
By your own amazement.
Yeah. It's like, it didn't amplify my ADHD, but it just, my interest in things. It's like, so I just thought it was a great experience, and I want to. One day, I think this will be such a great tool, but not just with this. If when your brain is going, my theory is when you're in that under the influence of psilocybin is affecting the brain, the positive suggestions, the difference between a good trip and a bad trip, as is the term they use, is your intentions. You always set your intentions you're going to have with these experiences. So, you're pre-programming what you're thinking about because you're going to be interpreting a lot of stuff that's popping up in your brain. And if you're in a negative mindset, that's going to be a really horrifying experience. Yeah. But if you're in a positive mindset, it's going to be magical, and you want to make it magical. And so, I literally talked to TJ when I was under, and it was a very good conversation. I just had joy when doing that. I had, and I'm not really a candidate that needed a lot of therapy, but it was just some of my childhood traumatic stuff with my addiction and other stuff I saw. I came to total terms with that. I was presented that all that happened for you to be you today. Let it go. It was necessary to get you to you, and it has no more power in your life, and it has zero power left anymore. And so it's very exciting. But like you're saying, Walt, the whole thing across the board, all of these things go together. It's not just one thing, but I see it just, I always say that you can live life, you have to live it forward, but when you look back, it all makes sense. As we're looking back to the path, how all this stuff we've been talking about, law of attraction, me and you doing this for 10 years, coming up on it. And,
actually, my anniversary was 10 years ago last September.
Wow. That's great. And, so, we have that, and the stuff we're talking about right now was not remotely in our vocabulary back then. It's now it's all coming together. The law of attraction, the mindset, what you believe, and how so now we're seeing how it responds. Because when people used to go, well, you can't just want something to happen. Well, you got to, if you believe it, then you can. And so that's what I like, how all this is reinforcing what we have been talking about for so long.
One thing that I want to ask you about before we run out of time, because as usual, we're running out of time. We do that a lot around here. But I mentioned earlier how I have created these affirmation, recordings, that I put to a very gentle music, and I use them in a semi-hypnotic state going to sleep as a way to kind of reprogram my brain. And it has helped. It is a good thing. One thing, though, that I'm still trying to find a good solution on, and I've actually had some interesting input from some of my co-hosts about things that they do. But I'm curious to know what your take is. I have found over the years that I have gotten better at staying focused where I want to stay focused, at staying more on the positive, optimistic side and less focus on the negative side. I still end up getting drawn to the negative side, but I'm trying to reduce that and accentuate the other and making some progress. But I'm wondering, I know that when I play my affirmation tapes, they help me a lot. It's like I'm really leveraging that period of time, but they're like 20 minutes long. We have 24 hours in the day, and it's not like I can just play the tapes all day. I've got things I need to do. So I'm just wondering if you can give us any ideas that you have about, what do you do to kind of make sure that you're you're doing whatever reprogramming you need to do throughout your day. Cause especially in your line of work, you're running into stuff. I mean, you're encountering people who have been through horrific things and so forth, and you're having to deal with that while you're trying to help them out. So you got to be doing some stuff to make sure you don't kind of go over that same cliff yourself.
There's several techniques, but my favorite technique is when you're in the affirmation stage and you start to feel it. You know what I mean? There's this energy you start to feel, right? Like, wow, this feels powerful. So if you take, some people tap their wrist, some people squeeze their wrist, but during that feeling, you lock that in. You say, I want this feeling. I want that. And you condition have you heard of this before?
That's the way I understand NLP works. You basically anchor your body.
Yeah, you're anchoring the feeling, and then when you go back to squeeze, you can automatically get that feeling. You know, the brain can go back to that once you get something connected. You know, I have childhood memories of certain smells. We had a condo that we went to all the time and had a weird smell, and not good or bad. And if I smell that, I remember like I'm 12 years old. I'm there. It's programmed. So same thing here. That's one of the best ways to do it. You can also have quick cues to flip back, you know, because the emotional guidance scale that I always sort of operate, or if I'm dealing with a particularly bad case, or, you know, when I'm picking up the energy of somebody that's really negative, I need to quickly get back to me, you know, on the occasion over the years when I have a client that either dies of an overdose or commits suicide, and you know it's devastating, and
sure.
you know and you know, especially with me having lost a son, you know, so now it's almost like a young man dies and it's reminding me of TJ dying, and it's just these other things. But I can allow myself some of that, but I need to quickly get back to me, and I use anchoring techniques all the time. It's one of my favorites. You can also, I know people that love this, but they have they call it a cheat sheet affirmation, and they have 5 of their top affirmations rapid fire in their brain, and they'll just say it mentally, boom, 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 boom. That works good for some people. That doesn't work great for me because my crazy ADD brain focuses like one affirmation, then I'm thinking about, oh, look at that. You know, it's like, it just goes away. But
I don't know if I'm ADD, but I have a similar response in that I do that for about 5 seconds and I'm bored already.
Yeah, exactly. So at the immediacy for me of anchoring and then drawing it back by squeezing and nobody can, you know, I like things that aren't obvious. So I can do that with my hand here, squeeze, and nobody, you know, it's not obvious. It's like, you know, some people do breathing techniques, but I can't say in the middle of a stressful moment, excuse me while I do my square breathing, everyone. Yeah. So but affirmation is my best answer. To that is the anchoring during the affirmation. That's my best answer. But there's other people that have it's really bio individual as well. But I have one young man that has memorized, he has 5 affirmations. He's brilliant, a lot smarter than I am. And, he has, you know, I'm smart. So he'll have like S. He has like the first letter of each affirmation that matters.
Yeah.
Yeah. An acronym. That's what, and he says that over and over. So his brain sees the whole thing.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that works great for him. But for me, I just start, to me, it's like, okay, it becomes a brain puzzle. I'm like, oh, look at that, you know?
Yeah. And tell us again how you select what you anchor into your body. I mean, you've already done that, so you already have the anchor, but how did you select it?
The stuff that, you know, for example, whatever's giving you the most problem, like anxiety, for example. So when I wanted to relieve myself from elevated stress or anxiety, you know, I find that, you know, that image of me sitting on the beach, that affirmation of you've really come a long way, and these fears that you're thinking about right now, and I never use the word fear in the affirmation, but the things that are creating stress for you right now are not, you know, they're no longer relevant. It's pre-programmed. So I'll talk myself through it. Now, that's part of my affirmation. But then when it comes to anchoring, I don't need to do all that. I just find that feeling. And so I just think about the feeling of that affirmation. And then it's like immediate, like, oh, yeah, that was great.
So when you selected that affirmation, did you select it based on the feeling that you associated with it?
Yeah. Well, what I did, I came up with the affirmations, and the affirmations that worked for me made me feel great. So when I found the affirmations that worked, that made me feel fantastic. So when I'm feeling like, yes, you're right, I got it. That's the feeling I anchor right there. That's that feeling.
So you're looking for that really high feeling.
Yes, that really high feeling or that really calm feeling sometimes, because I do tend to run a little hot, as you can imagine. So that calming feeling is sometimes that I need to do, because, I have these days where things just happen so fast and so much happens, and I need to take a minute to just calm that down and then reset, especially when you're dealing with volatile situations.
Yeah. How long did it take you to really anchor that in to the point where you felt it, like you were reliving it at the same level that you experienced?
It probably took a pretty good a year of me doing that regularly to get it down pat. It took a while.
So you had to like go at it for a year and
yeah.
I guess every day you would try to anchor it in?
Every day. It was part of my morning routine for a long time. I do most of those kind of things in my morning routine.
Okay. So that means every day that you're trying to anchor it in, you're looking for that day, getting into that high feeling state, and then anchor it. And then the next day you do the same thing, try to find another way to get to that high feeling state and anchor it.
And some days, to be fair, the reason it took years, I couldn't get that feeling every day. So I don't anchor a feeling that's not there. So if I wasn't able to get it that day, I'll do it the next day.
Okay.
Yeah.
You basically let yourself have a not so good day.
Yes. And one of the other things that I use, as you know, I work out at a ridiculous pace. After a great workout, I also can anchor that feeling of total physical euphoria. Like, I can do that, and it's sort of for different situations. So I anchored that feeling that's another one I can achieve too.
Does it matter what part of your body you select to anchor?
To me,
it touches a piece of the body each time, right?
Yeah, it needs to be the same. I don't think it matters what, but if I want that calm feeling, it's my left wrist I squeeze. So if I want that euphoric feeling after a workout, I pull back this finger.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you got two different ones that you programmed.
Yeah. Yes.
Got it. All right. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And in fact, you got me thinking, okay, so what activities do I do that give me that euphoria? And one of the first one that comes to my mind is doing the podcast, and the second one is the dancing that I like to do. I like to do social dancing, ballroom dancing. So I'm thinking, maybe I should be leveraging that. Maybe I should really turn that into an anchor.
Well, you should. And dancing is incredible exercise. I mean, you burn a lot of calories. There's a lot of coordination. There's a lot of balance. So there should be, after you're done dancing, hopefully you're having some of this euphoric feeling.
Yeah. And I usually am. I mean, even there have been times where lately I've been taking some classes, quite a few classes. I've been kind of in immersion ever since the divorce. And the classes, sometimes early on, some of them I was getting frustrated because I couldn't get the dance. I couldn't get the steps down. My mind was like, so I wouldn't want to do it in those situations. But many of the classes that come to the end, like, whoa, wow, yeah, we did a lot of good stuff there. And that's where I'm feeling pretty good. So I'm thinking that's where I should do the anchoring.
Yeah. Well, good. I love that. Start trying that. Tell me how you think. How it feels going.
I guess the last question I have, and we're over an hour, but I don't care at this point.
We do that a lot.
I guess my last question is, how do I select, how I'm using that anchor? I mean, can I just use it anytime I need a jolt of energy, or should I build the anchor associated with, some particular kind of thing, or how do I do that?
Well, one of the things that I like to do, and again, this is based on solely my opinion, so the other people may have a different opinion. If you use the anchor too frequently, you get a tolerance to it. You don't want to just every day, I want to be calm every day. I want to be calm. If I do that 5 times in a day, it's not as effective the last time. You know what I mean? Okay. So, I would like to use it if I'm just having a particular moment where I'm always sort of again, I'm a big Abraham Hicks guy, so I'm always trying to see where I'm at emotionally.
Right.
And if I'm down on that emotional guidance scale, and I need to, if I get down to 15 or below in my mind, I got to anchor that up a little bit. You know what I mean? That's one of my tools I use, to do that. So I think, you can use it however you choose to use it, but I think you should save it for moments you really need it.
Okay.
And use it where, and again, become convinced that it's really working by anchoring it really well. And then when you do it, you'll be like, this is really impressive. I mean, the totally not scientific, by the way. So, but I have an app on my phone where it gives a heartbeat. You can take your heartbeat, and my resting heartbeat is about 53.
Okay.
And I keep it. That's a good, healthy, athletic heartbeat.
Yeah.
So in the middle of a work day one day, I was dealing with a super stressful situation, and the session ended, and I took my heartbeat, and it was going to about 130 beats a minute.
Wow.
Which for me is pretty high.
Yeah.
So I put my phone down. I anchored for 5 minutes, got calm again. When I took it in 5 minutes, it was 68.
Wow. Yeah, big drop.
So again, not scientific. The situation had changed, but to me, it had some effect on some level.
No, definitely did. Clearly.
Yeah.
Yeah. It didn't necessarily get you down to your ultimate rest level, but it got pretty close.
Well, and during the work day, when my resting heartbeat upon waking up, I run about mid-60s during the day.
Okay, so that makes sense then.
Yeah,
it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, so I would say that was very successful. Yeah.
Yes.
Does it make sense? I got to ask two more questions. First,
sure.
Does it make sense after you built up an anchor point? Does it make sense to keep working on it? Does it continue to grow, or does it kind of like reach a threshold and doesn't grow beyond that point?
I feel it once you get it, it's there. If you need to reinforce that anchor later, it doesn't hurt to reinforce it, maybe build it up, give it some power back. But you can also develop multiple anchors. You get really good at it.
That was the other question.
Yeah, I assume that's where you're going. So, but like I said, I have two that I use frequently, but I have my friend the psychiatrist that sort of taught me this, he runs about 5 anchors.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because it occurs to me that if you have multiple anchors, that gives you more things you can fall back on during the day if you need to.
Yes.
Without having a loss in potency, so to speak.
Yeah. And that's a good point. And I say this, my life is so incredible. You know what I mean? I have this life that you can tell. I tell you all the time, I love my life. I love my job. So I seldom need anchor is just trying to get within the moment. You know what I mean? But if you have more stuff going on, recent divorce, or, after TJ died, I sure could have used a lot more anchors than I had. I didn't have that knowledge back then,
Right.
So if you go through a lot, multiple anchors is probably a very wise idea, because using Abraham Hicks's theory as well, you can't jump from a 20, which is really low, to a 7. So you got to just go up the emotional. So maybe a theory, and I'll research this more. This might be a good idea. We're brainstorming.
Yeah.
If you have sort of elevating anchors, one to get you sort of up a few, and then, I like that idea. I might have to, I got a new thing to look into now.
Well, when you mentioned Abraham Hicks, they recommend walking up the emotional guidance scale. So if you're at anger, you aim for irritation. If you're at irritation, you aim for boredom. If you're at boredom, you aim for optimism, and so on and so forth. Well, this sounds like an alternative way to do the same thing.
Yeah. And if you had multiple anchors, maybe the most basic anchor to get you out of that worst spot, and then another anchor and then another anchor. You say you had 3 or 4 anchors that get you all the way up there pretty quick. That'd be great. I didn't think about that until
It's a really interesting idea. Okay. Something worth exploring and playing with. I'm definitely going to start playing with some NLP anchors and try to see what I can build in.
Good.
Yeah. Okay. Good. All right. Well, next week we're going to have to talk about the psilocybin. That's going to be an interesting conversation. But meanwhile,
yes. Yeah. And give me one little disclaimer here. Just if I want to be talking about stuff, by no means am I recommending people need to do psilocybin. This is in most states it's illegal. If you're going to do it, it needs to be with somebody who's been trained to do this stuff in a state that is legal. That's very important. I need to make sure that's very clear. And young people are not intended for this. The brain is still developing. You cannot do this.
Okay. All right. Good. And we'll make sure that we reemphasize that next week when we do the show.
Yes.
But thank you for telling us about Milton Erickson. Fascinating guy. Absolutely fascinating.
Great story. Great guy. In fact, anybody look him up. There's some great stuff on just the internet. He has a deeper story, obviously, than we can cover this, but he did some fascinating stuff in his life. One of the great guys to sort of till today, probably never heard of.
I never heard of him until you told me about him yesterday. That was the first I heard about him. I never heard even the name before. And my God, what this guy accomplished without modern technology, without any of the support mechanisms, in the face of all kinds of criticism from people who thought he was a kook, and he managed to accomplish what he did anyway. Wow, that's impressive. That's more impressive than curing himself or, overcoming the deformities of polio.
I completely agree. I think that's just that, me, resilience and don't give up. That's a whole chapter on just that alone.
Yeah, really impressive. So, well, thank you again. That was really a wonderful show. This is reinforcing why I'm so glad to have you back on the show, and I'm really glad you're making it.
I love doing it, my friend. Always exciting for me. Can't wait next week.
Thank you to those. We had some people tuning in. Thank you to people who were tuning into the live stream, and thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.